On our 10th wedding anniversary, my husband raised his wine glass with a smile. But something in his eyes felt wrong. It was subtle, too subtle for anyone else to notice, but I'd spent a decade learning the difference between his charm and his lies. Just minutes earlier, a waitress I'd never met pulled me aside in the hallway. Her voice was shaking as she said, "I saw your husband put something in your drink while you were gone. I don't know what it was, but it didn't look right. Please be careful." I went back to the table, looked into my husband's eyes, and smiled. Then I switched our glasses. I drank his, he drank mine. And 45 minutes later, he collapsed. My name is Clara Weston. I'm 38 years old, founder of Weston Consulting, and this is the night my picture-perfect marriage ended in a flash of sirens and shattered trust. If your partner tried to poison you, what would you do? Would you call the police? Would you run? Or would you make sure they drank it first? Let me know in the comments. And if you believe secrets always come to light, subscribe to EN True Tales. A new story drops every day. Ready? Let me tell you how it all began. People always said we were the golden couple. Daniel and I met in our late 20s, both of us ambitious, sharp, and determined to conquer the world. I had just launched my consulting firm, tiny back then, barely a desk, and a dream. He was a junior investor at a boutique fund, all charm and ambition. He swept me off my feet within weeks. Dinner at rooftops, late-night strategy talks, shared notebooks full of goals. We clicked like two pieces of a puzzle, hungry, driven, passionate. 10 years later, Weston Consulting had become one of the most respected boutique firms in Chicago. I was CEO with 25 employees, 5 global clients, and more projects than I could handle. Daniel's investment business, at least on the surface, was booming. His name was in magazines. We had a condo overlooking the lake. On paper, we were unstoppable, but I'd started to see the cracks long before our anniversary night. Daniel was always competitive. He hated losing, even in board games, even in dinner conversations. But somewhere along the way, his hunger changed. It went from building something with me to building something in spite of me, or worse, on top of me. He became secretive, late-night phone calls that ended when I walked into the room, financial statements with missing pages, and every time I asked, he waved it off. Just client stuff. Clara, boring numbers. You wouldn't be interested. Except I've always been good at patterns. It's what made me a great strategist. And something about his recent patterns didn't add up, like how he flinched every time I mentioned audits, or how his jaw tightened when I brought up our joint account. He hadn't contributed in months, not a cent. 2 weeks before our anniversary, I overheard a phone call. He was pacing in our office, his voice low and tense. "No, I told you she hasn't figured anything out yet. We're fine. Just give me more time." When I stepped in, he smiled too quickly. "You hungry?" he asked. Thinking we do Italian tonight, I said nothing, just nodded and added another mental checkmark to the growing list of red flags. By the time our anniversary arrived, I had already made up my mind. If I couldn't get honesty, I'd get clarity. I booked a table at the Altura, a rotating rooftop restaurant with a panoramic view of the city skyline. The place was special to us. It was where he proposed. It was also where I realized that whatever love we had turned into something else. Daniel wore his best suit. His cologne, cedarwood, and smoke still made my pulse race, though now more from anxiety than affection. I wore a navy silk, the same shade as the dress I'd worn 10 years ago when he proposed. We looked perfect, but I felt like I was dining with a stranger. We barely talked. He kept checking his phone, muttering about a client in Hong Kong. I kept forcing smiles, trying not to show that I was watching his every move. The waiter brought our wine, a deep Cabernet. He toasted first. To us, he said, his eyes not quite meeting mine. I mirrored him. To us, and that's when the waitress, Emily, appeared behind me. Clearing plates at a nearby table, I recognized her vaguely. She leaned in as I stood to go to the restroom. Her voice was a whisper. "I saw your husband put something in your glass. Please, be careful." I froze. But I didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't make a scene. Instead, I walked to the restroom, washed my face, looked at myself in the mirror, and made a decision. I wasn't going to ask Daniel what he put in my drink. I was going to make him drink it. My hands were still wet when I left the restroom. The scent of jasmine soap clung to my fingers as I walked down the gilded hallway. heels clicking on polished marble, but inside, everything was ice, not fear exactly. Something colder. Clarity I'd spent years wondering if I was imagining it, if Daniel's cold glances, late nights, vague excuses were just stress. But that waitress Emily, she didn't look like someone chasing drama. Her eyes were wide with fear, and fear doesn't lie. By the time I stepped back into the dining room, my mind was already made up. The wine glasses sat there like loaded weapons side by side on our table. One was mine. One was his. I walked calmly toward him, sliding into my seat as if nothing had happened. His phone was still in his hand, still texting. "You okay?" he asked, his voice flat. "You look a little pale." I gave him the most practiced smile I could muster. "Just a headache, long day." He nodded, eyes darting back to his screen. I let a beat pass, then reached for the wine glass on my right. I paused, faked a stretch, then gently swapped it with the one on his side. His eyes never left his phone. He didn't notice. My fingers curled around the stem of his glass, the one he'd tampered with. I raised it to my lips, met his gaze, and said softly, "To 10 more years." He hesitated. Just a flicker. Then raised his own glass, the one I was originally supposed to drink, and mirrored me. "To 10 more," he echoed. He drank deeply. I sipped mine, barely wetting my lips. The jazz band played something low and dreamy. The city shimmered beyond the glass walls. But inside me, a countdown had begun. I watched him. I asked about the deal that had been keeping him up at night. He fumbled, said it was complicated, then glanced at the wine in front of me, his wine, and said, "You're not drinking much, saving it." I smiled. "Want to savor it?" He didn't smile back. His fingers tapped nervously on the table. I remembered a night 6 months ago. He came home late, tie loosened, pacing the condo like a caged animal. "I'm bleeding money, Clara," he'd said. "The market's a shark tank, and I'm chum." I'd offered to help emotionally at least. But when I refused to funnel funds from my firm into his accounts, he'd gone cold. Now I knew why. This wasn't about partnership anymore. It was survival, and I was the lifeboat he intended to sink. Minutes passed, his face changed slowly, like a cloud creeping over the sun. First a flicker in his eyes, then a cough, a dry one, then sweat beading at his hairline. "You okay?" I asked, steady as stone. "Fine," he muttered, rubbing his eyes. "Just tired." His hand shook as he reached for his napkin. Then he blinked hard once, twice. His shoulders slumped. "Daniel," I leaned in. His face had gone pale, his pupils wide and unfocused. Then his hand dropped. His wine glass tipped. A dark red stain bled across the white linen. "Daniel." I was out of my chair before the glass hit the floor. Voices rose, silverware clattered. A woman gasped across the room. Emily dropped her tray. "Call 911, I shouted. Daniel groaned, tried to speak, then collapsed forward, head hitting the table. The room erupted. People stood backed away. Waiters rushed in. Someone was already on the phone with emergency services. I stood there, hands trembling, my dress soaked in wine and panic. Somewhere in the blur, I met Emily's eyes. She looked horrified, but she also looked vindicated. She had saved my life, and I had just watched the man I once loved almost drink himself to death on his own plan. The ambulance sirens echoed in the distance, growing louder with each second. Daniel lay slumped in his chair, barely conscious, his breathing shallow and uneven. His lips had gone pale. A light sheen of sweat clung to his forehead. I stood motionless beside him, my heart pounding. The wine he meant for me now stained the white tablecloth, spreading like a wound. People stared, some whispered. A few pulled out their phones. But in that moment, I didn't care how it looked, because I knew this wasn't an accident. He hadn't just collapsed from stress or exhaustion. He had collapsed because he drank the poison he'd meant for me. Emily, the waitress, hovered nearby, nervous but alert. A manager tried to usher her away, but she stood her ground, eyes locked on Daniel. I could see it on her face. She knew too. The paramedics arrived quickly, rushing in with practiced efficiency. I stepped back as they lowered him to the floor and began checking vitals, inserting IVs, shouting numbers. "Ma'am, do you know what?" he took one of them asked. I hesitated. "I don't," I said, "but I think it was meant for me." He blinked, confused. I didn't elaborate, because how could I explain the full truth right there? that my husband, my partner of 10 years, had likely tried to drug me, that I had switched our glasses out of instinct and desperation. The medics wheeled Daniel out. I followed behind them in silence. My shoes were soaked, my dress ruined, but I barely felt it. At the hospital, I sat alone in the waiting room under harsh fluorescent lights, the buzz of the overhead panel like a steady hum in my ears. The wine still clung to my skin, sticky and sour. I didn't call anyone. Not my parents, not my assistant, not even my best friend. Because what would I say? Hi, I think my husband tried to poison me, but I made him drink it instead. A doctor in blue scrubs approached me. Mrs. Weston, I stood bracing. He's stable, she said, but sedated. We found a high concentration of diazepam in his system, a powerful sedative. Very dangerous at that dose. She looked at me carefully. This isn't something people take recreationally. It's usually prescribed in very small amounts for severe anxiety or insomnia. But the amount we found in his system, it was high enough to be considered life-threatening. I swallowed hard. I swapped our glasses. I said quietly. A waitress warned me. She saw him put something in mine. I didn't believe it, but I switched them anyway. The doctor's eyes softened, but her tone remained professional. That decision might have saved your life. She paused. I have to report this. The police are on their way. They'll want your statement. The words settled on me like cold water. Police statement, crime. I nodded. Okay. Minutes later, Detective Naomi Blake arrived. She wore a navy blazer, a tight bun, and eyes that missed nothing. Mrs. Weston, she said, motioning for me to follow her to a private corner of the waiting area. I need you to walk me through what happened. From the beginning, and I told her everything. Emily's warning, the subtle switch, Daniel's collapse. I told her about the distant behavior, the financial secrecy, the feeling that something had been deeply wrong for months. Naomi took notes, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she asked only one question. Do you know why he might want to harm you? I looked her in the eye and gave the first honest answer of the night. I think he's broke. I think he's drowning in debt. And I think he wanted access to my firm's money. Naomi leaned back, absorbing that. Do you know anyone who can confirm that? Business partners, employees? Anyone who might know what's going on inside his firm? I paused. There was one name, Lucas Grant, his old partner. They'd had a mysterious falling out a few years ago. Daniel had always painted him as the villain, but suddenly I wasn't so sure. Naomi scribbled the name down. We'll look into it. As she stood, she offered a parting thought. You did the right thing, Mrs. Weston. What you described tonight, it's attempted poisoning. That's a felony. And if what you're saying about the finances checks out, this might go deeper than just one drink. I watched her walk away. Her words echoed louder than the hospital noise. Felony, poisoning, deeper. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a crime. And Daniel wasn't just a bad husband. He was now a suspect. That night, I didn't sleep, not even when I finally got home. Because this wasn't the end, it was the moment everything changed. The next morning, I woke in a fog. I hadn't actually slept. Not really, just laid there in my wine-stained dress, still numb, still reliving the flicker in Daniel's eyes before he drank. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet, but not peaceful, like the stillness after a bomb has gone off. I made black coffee, though my hands shook as I poured. Then I sat at the kitchen counter, staring at the steam as if it held answers. By 9 a.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered, Clara Weston. Yes, this is Lucas Grant. We need to talk about Daniel. The name hit me like a slap. Lucas had been Daniel's former business partner years ago. They'd built their real estate firm together until something split them apart. Daniel always said Lucas was reckless, that he tried to embezzle funds. But now I wasn't so sure. I don't have many answers, Lucas said over the phone. But I have proof documents. Things you need to see. Can you meet me in an hour? We met at Brew and Bean, a quiet cafe tucked off Michigan Avenue. Lucas looked older than I remembered, salt and pepper hair. A tired face, but his eyes were sharp. He slid a manila folder across the table. These are copies, originals are with my lawyer. I've been holding on to this in case Daniel ever came after me again. Looks like he finally turned on someone worse. Inside the folder were forged medical reports, bank transfers, estate paperwork. All in Daniel's handwriting, all signed. All targeting me. One document stood out. a psychiatric evaluation completely fabricated, declaring that I had early onset dementia. It was dated just 6 weeks ago, and it claimed I was no longer fit to manage my own assets. Daniel was going to file for guardianship over you, Lucas explained. He had a lawyer draft the motion. Once it went through, he'd control everything. Your accounts, your company, your name. I stared down at the forged diagnosis, my stomach turning. And the drug I asked Lucas nodded grimly. That was Plan B. He leaned in. Daniel's firm is gone, Clara. He's millions in debt. He's been robbing Peter to pay Paul for 2 years. Investors are circling, creditors are filing motions. He needed your money to cover the collapse, and he was willing to do anything to get it. I sat back, heart racing. I thought of our anniversary dinner, the toast. His hand trembling, his voice flat when he said 10 more years. He wasn't planning for 10 more years. He was planning for one more signature mine. Lucas tapped the folder. These are yours. Take them to the police, to your lawyer, to whoever you trust. I'm done running from this man. And he's not just a threat to you. He's dangerous and desperate. His voice dropped. Desperate men don't quit, Clara. Back at my condo, I called Marta Jensen, my longtime attorney, and the only person I trusted more than myself. When she picked up, I said only 3 words. I need you. 30 minutes later, we were sitting in her office surrounded by contracts, case files, and legal coffee-stained folders. I handed her the manila envelope. She flipped through the documents in silence. When she reached the forged psychiatric report, she stopped cold. This isn't just fraud, she said. This is calculated, coordinated, and criminal. Her fingers tapped the page. He already filed preliminary paperwork to obtain power of attorney. If the court had approved it, you wouldn't have been able to access your own accounts. He'd control Weston, consulting your investments, everything. I blinked hard. He was going to erase me, I whispered. Marta nodded. But now we erase him. Within an hour, she filed a formal complaint with the police, a civil suit to freeze our joint accounts, an emergency petition for divorce with attempted harm as grounds, and a restraining order effective immediately. Then she picked up her phone and called Detective Naomi Blake. I have documentation that connects Daniel Weston to fraud-forged medical reports and a clear financial motive for attempted poisoning. We're coming to the station. That night, I stood outside the police station, the folder still in my hands, my heart a mess of rage and relief. Naomi met me at the door. She'd already reviewed Lucas's documents. This changes everything, she said. We have your statement, the waitress's testimony. Security footage from the restaurant confirms Daniel tampered with your drink. And now we have motive, fraud, financial collapse, an orchestrated plan to take you out of the picture. She took the folder from me, her face grave. Clara, this isn't just personal anymore. This is a criminal investigation, and we're going after him. Daniel was still in the hospital when they arrested him. According to Detective Blake, the moment he was stable enough to be discharged, officers were already waiting outside his room. Handcuffs, Miranda rights. No ceremony, no more pretending. It made the evening news before I even got home. Prominent investor Daniel Weston arrested in connection with attempted poisoning of wife Clara Weston. They aired the restaurant footage, grainy but damning. Daniel glancing around, sliding his hand over a wine glass. A white pinch of powder falling in Emily's statement was quoted directly. So was mine. The story exploded. By the time I arrived at Marta's office the next morning, she already had 3 voicemails from reporters, 1 from a talk show, 2 from competing law firms trying to offer counsel. She ignored them all. Instead, she handed me a copy of the divorce paperwork. Everything had been filed. Emergency protection, asset freezing, guardianship nullification. You're protected. She said calm but firm. Now we move to finish this. Meanwhile, the police moved quickly with Lucas's documents, Emily's testimony, and the footage from the Altura. The DA built their case in less than a week. Charges: attempted murder, fraud, conspiracy to falsify medical records, and financial exploitation. Daniel's lawyer, Reed Armstrong, one of those slick, media-trained types, released a statement denying all allegations, claimed Daniel had been under extreme mental strain, that the drink was never intended to harm, and that marital disagreements had been blown out of proportion. It didn't matter. The evidence was airtight, and the judge saw through the spin. Daniel's bail was denied. His first court appearance was set for 2 weeks later, and I knew I had to be there. The courthouse smelled like stale coffee and polished wood. I sat in the front row, flanked by Marta on one side and a uniformed officer on the other. I wore a black blazer. No makeup, hair pulled back. I wanted the jury to see the real me. Not a victim, not a CEO, just a woman telling the truth. Daniel was led in wearing a county-issued suit, wrinkled and 2 sizes too big. His face was thinner, paler, but his eyes still searched for control until they landed on me. He didn't smile, didn't blink, just stared, and I stared back. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Vargas, stood and began her opening statement. Daniel Weston attempted to incapacitate his wife, using a sedative drug placed in her drink. Why? Because he was drowning in debt, and her financial empire was his way out. She presented the footage, the forged psychiatric report, the falsified bank records, each one like a nail sealing the coffin of Daniel's false persona. Then came the witnesses. Emily Rhodes testified first, her voice clear, her eyes steady. I saw him drop something into her glass. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it wasn't right. I couldn't just watch that happen. Then it was my turn. I told the court everything from the cracks in our marriage to the moment I felt the shift when love turned into strategy. I described the switch. His collapse. The hospital. The manila folder full of lies. But the moment I'll never forget was when the prosecutor asked me, "Mrs. Weston, did you believe your husband intended to harm you?" And I answered without a tremor, "I believe he intended to erase me." The courtroom was silent. Even Daniel didn't look away. Then Vargas handed the floor to Daniel's defense. Reed tried to paint me as paranoid, controlling, emotionally unstable. He even referenced a single therapy session I attended 2 years ago for burnout. But the judge wasn't buying it. Neither was the jury, when Lucas testified, calmly laying out how Daniel siphoned funds from their business, faked statements, and buried him in debt. Reed stopped asking questions halfway through. He knew he was done. And then came the verdict. The judge's voice was firm. "Daniel Weston, you are hereby found guilty on all charges. Attempted murder, fraud, conspiracy. You are sentenced to 15 years in state prison without the possibility of parole." The gavel hit the wood, a final thud that echoed in my chest. Daniel didn't flinch, but his eyes, the way they dropped to the floor, told me everything. His power was gone. Not just his money, not just his business, but the illusion, the persona, the mask gone. I stepped out of the courthouse to a wall of flashing cameras. But I didn't stop. I didn't speak, because this wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. Daniel had tried to write me out of my own life. Instead, I'd reclaimed the pen, and I was ready to start over 2 months later. I moved out of the condo. I packed every reminder of that life, wedding photos, designer suits, curated furniture, and donated or sold it all. The place didn't feel like mine anymore. It hadn't for a long time. The last thing I touched was Daniel's favorite leather chair, the one he used to sit in while pretending to read finance journals. I left it behind. I bought a small cottage an hour outside the city. Nothing grand, but it had wildflowers in the yard, creaky floorboards that hummed when I walked, and silence, blessed silence. A space that was mine for the first time in years. I breathed. I painted. I walked barefoot on dewy grass. I let go. My firm was running smoothly thanks to my team and the systems I'd built. I gave my CFO more responsibility and stepped back from the front lines. I didn't need the control anymore. I needed peace. But there was one thread I couldn't leave loose. Emily Rhodes, the young waitress who risked her job and maybe more to warn a stranger. I reached out, sent a message through the restaurant. She responded within hours. We met for coffee on a quiet Saturday by the river. She looked brighter, freer, same braid, same grounded calm. When I offered her financial help or a job at my firm, she smiled and said, "No, thank you. I'm okay." I just did what I hoped someone would do for me. That stayed with me. Long after she left, long after I sat by the window with my coffee gone cold. Because sometimes survival isn't about being stronger. It's about someone showing up in the right moment and reminding you you're worth saving. And sometimes the people who save you aren't heroes in capes. They're waitresses with kind eyes, or lawyers with sharp pens, or old friends with folders full of buried truth. As for Daniel, he's in prison, his empire's gone. His name, a warning, not a legacy. And me, I'm still writing my next chapter. But this time, I'm writing it for me. What do you do when the person you trusted most becomes the person you fear, when love turns into leverage, and your name, your mind, even your life becomes their plan? B, you survive, you rebuild. You tell the truth no matter how ugly. I used to believe strength meant staying fighting for a marriage, holding everything together, being the stable one. But I've learned, sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away, especially when the person beside you stops walking with you and starts walking over you. Emily didn't know me, she had no reason to speak up, but she did. And because of her, I'm alive. So here's what I'll leave you with. Never ignore your instincts, never silence your doubts, and never underestimate the quiet courage of a stranger. If you've ever had someone betray your trust and still found the strength to rise, I want to hear your story. Let me know in the comments, have you ever trusted the wrong person and lived to rewrite your ending? And if you believe the truth always finds the light, hit that subscribe button for more real stories. Just like this one. This was Clara Weston. Thank you for listening, and thank you for choosing to believe survivors.